just begin with one example. When we first got married, I said one day when it was very cold, I said, Jerry, you should wear a sweater.
And of course, I was from America. And here's a woman from Taiwan telling me, you should wear a sweater. If you're cold, you wear a sweater. Don't tell me what to do.
In fact, I use it as a very polite suggestion for his good, right? By saying, you should do this and that. But he took it as an imposition. I'm the boss. I'm telling you, you should put on a sweater.
Because that's what your mother says to you.
So that's one example that almost broke our relationship at the very beginning.
Before it even started.
So I had to be very careful in my choice of modal auxiliaries. Should, would, could, and so on.
And of course, should, in this case, translate the Chinese 应该, which is not like imposition. It's a suggestion.
Right.
It's different.
The other day, I received an email from my student who couldn't come to my class. She said, I probably cannot come to your class. 我可能无法 do such and such. Our interpretation is she won't come. But
in English, if you say I probably, there's still a chance that I'll make it, but I think I may be delayed.
So in other words, if we say 可能, it's probably not going to happen, right? But
if I say probably, there's still a fair chance that it might happen.
So if you cannot make it, what would you say?
I can't make it, period.
And for us, it's too direct, right? We prefer something, there's more leeway, less direct. So that's examples we encounter every day in our communication. Either make it or break it. So what are we going to do for the next?
Point it at the computer.
I can point here and there. It still works. The first principle in the first hour, we are going to talk about all communication is intercultural. We just demonstrated one example. It happens every day. And then the second hour, we will talk about good pedagogy is always good. So we need to work on those basic principles. The third hour, we are going to address good examples, practical examples, as senior professors, veterans in our field. Very senior. We have been there. We have done that. So we want to share with you what works, what doesn't work from our experiences. Okay, so you may have noticed the title, Demystifying. And demystifying you could think of as demystifying. Right now, many of you are probably beginning a career, beginning to teach EMI, and you're moving forward, but you can't really see clearly. And so what we're hoping to do today is to make the future a little bit clearer so it's easier for you to move ahead. Okay, so we're presenting a lot of ideas today. Again, we have many experiences in many different areas, and it's more than you can take in all at one time, like an all-you-can-eat buffet. So pick one or two things that you think will be useful. And every hour we'll stop at the end of each part for questions. So take a note of the slide number there, and we can quickly go back to whatever slide that is if you have a particular question. So remember, this is very much like an EMI class right here. If you feel something we are not explaining clearly, please interrupt us. ask us to say it again or explain it in a different way. Let's talk about all communication is intercultural. When you speak a different language, you actually act like a different person. And there's a very famous social linguist, Deborah Tennant, who wrote a popular seller, "You Just Don't Understand." In other words, when men and women communicate, sometimes we represent different cultures. It's intercultural communication. And there's a YouTuber who promoted a special translator. It's called Manslater. For men to understand women's talk, you need a translator and, interpret whatever he or she says. It's called manslater. For women, women's later. You can also see, for cognitive linguists, we prefer to assign a textbook like this to our students. Look at the translations of the two. The translation, the Chinese translation. The title of the book is Through the Language Class, Why the World Looks Different in Other Languages. But the Chinese translation, 小心别踩到我北方的脚. Okay, so you can see when you use different languages to communicate with different audiences, you speak differently. It's not direct translation. You also translate the culture. Let me talk about 5 categories of societal culture. Actually, these 5 categories can be found all the time within a person. Now, it's an election campaign, right? Depending on your political camp, you act collectively. Collectivism is important for you when you are for a certain party. But when we apply for an NSC grant, we act as an individual person. Our individualism culture competing to get what we want, to perform the best will come up. So the same person, depending on what you do, you may choose different way, different culture, either collectivism or individualism. This morning, we had breakfast at the hotel. We saw 7 men sitting at one table. And when they finished, they all stood up, taking their tray and their dishes to clean, put it in a place. I was thinking, why can't they do it individually? One person finishes, you can stand up to clean up your dishes. The other does the same thing. Why do they have to do it together, all stood up at the same time, lining up, to try to clean their dishes?
But they're a group of cyclists, and they chose to cycle together. And when you cycle together, you cycle all in a line. That's their culture.
So this is the first example. The second example, I remember when I went to the US the first time as an international student for my master's degree, I went in to greet my professor at the University of Minnesota. When I saw him, I say, "How are you, Professor Carter?" And then Professor Carter, whose first name is Roy, said, "Don't call me Professor Carter, call me Roy." I was thinking, I'm a 20-year-old woman, and this is a 50-year-old man. How can I possibly address him as Roy? First person basis, that's too intimate, too close. And plus, there's a hierarchical relationship. I cannot address him as Roy. Then the man also said, "Women never bow to men." I was thinking, I am respecting you by showing, my body language shows I am submitting to your authority and you don't accept that, I was quite offended at that time. So you can see, sometimes we speak a language, but our behavior is still another culture or another language. That's exactly the case. Later, when I talked to my professor at Cornell University, this time it's a female professor. Once again, she is much older than I am, so I call her Professor Wall. She is French, Professor Wall. She said, her first name is Linda, but she said, call me Lind. Call me Lind. Once again, I just couldn't call her Lind. And I never established a close relationship with her. That's actually not very good for my career development. So I should have learned to be closer, you know, not hierarchical, but solidarity, equal relationship. Yeah, that would have helped my career in my graduate school. Next, even a person like me, when I am teaching, I am not afraid of risks. I'm innovative. However, when we went to Alishan the other day to visit different tribes, you know, to see how they promote their endangered language.
Slow down. What's the speed limit here?
Yeah.
Do you know where you're going?
When Jerry was driving, I was sitting next to him. I was worried, you know, because physical danger is something I want to avoid. I don't want to die because of my stupidity. 不要笨死. I don't want to die due to my stupidity. Okay, I want to have an honorable death. So that's another example. In teaching, I'm very much a risk taker, but in terms of physical danger, no. Finally, achievement culture versus nurturing culture. I am a taskmaster. So for me, you know, when we work together, like yesterday, even at the dinner table, you know, I started to ask Professor O, what's the setting is going to be like tomorrow? You know, who these professors are going to participate. But that's a setting people want to establish relationship with each other, right? Talking about personal needs. But I immediately address, what am I supposed to do? You know, values, material success, and tasks. Okay. And finally, our culture is, we have both actually. And when are we very indirect? We already gave an example at the beginning. And the so-called high context culture. High context culture. You don't have to use a lot of words. Just look at you. Okay, I know what he wants now. I don't have to say anything. He wants me to stop quickly so he can proceed. Right?
Because we have a lot to cover today, and when she gets talking about something she's interested in.
Yeah, so he's standing there, are you done? Are you done? That's high context culture. He doesn't have to say anything, but he already gives me the signal. Low context culture, you have to write down everything in black and white. That's low context culture. Okay, fine.
All right. So not only are there different cultures in terms of social cultures, but academic culture is very different from normal culture. I mean, look at this example. Can you understand that? No. It's not Greek. It's chemical engineering. This was written by one of my students in my engineering writing class. But it's a totally different language than common English. And if you don't study this particular subject, no one writes like this. No one learns English like this. So academic culture, English for academic purposes, is a second language for everybody. And that's important to remember. Even for us as native speakers of English, academic culture is something we learn. Also, in terms of academic culture, I'm a reviewer for a journal. And I reviewed a paper, and the people responded. And this was the response to the reviewers. They started out, "Dear Doctor," and then they gave the editor's family name. Okay, that's a little unusual. "We hope you have been well." Do you write that in a response to reviewers? Not usually. This is like, a personal letter. "In response to your request, this letter describes how we have responded to the reviewers in the previous submission, concentrating on reviewer 1. We found reviewer 1's comments helpful and implemented almost every suggestion that reviewer made. We captured the specifics below," etc. Now, I think I was reviewer 1 because they made most of the changes that I suggested. And I said, yeah, they did a good job. But if I were reviewer 2, that they never mentioned at all, they gave no list of responses to each individual item, I'm not sure how I would feel if I were reviewer 2. Learning to write, whether it's articles, whether it's response to reviewers, this is something that each of us needs to learn separate from learning English. Because there is an expected format, and you have to match that format. When you join an academic community, you learn the principles of that academic community. Social sciences, research articles focus on the results and the discussion. And correct English is important. Now I'm writing in applied linguistics because I'm writing about the structure, genre analysis of engineering articles. And correct English is vitally important in that field because your data are words. So you have to be very careful with words. But in engineering, it's very different. In engineering, I found that there's actually a different analogous structure. But the focus is on the process, which is like the equivalent of methods. But instead of this really brief methods, it's half the paper because it's their design. And the English really doesn't matter. We have Chinese English and Finnish English and Czechoslovakian English, and you can tell a lot about where the person is from just by reading the English and seeing what types of errors they make. But they don't care. IMRD, Introduction, Materials and Methods, Results, Discussion. We'll come back to that later.
M is actually methods. Methods.
So in engineering, what matters is your design. And you show that usually with a figure or with equations. So the English really doesn't matter that much. Cultures, even within academic culture, are different. Every community is different. And therefore, academic culture is an L2 for everyone. And as we were talking at the beginning, when you are writing, speaking in a different language, you speak differently.
So there are two obstacles. One is academic culture. You need to learn a totally different culture in each discipline. Number two, it's language barrier. We use a different language as a medium of instruction. No wonder we are anxious, we are worried. You know, there are too many hurdles we have to overcome. It's not an easy job.
Okay, but we have another thing that we're dealing with as well. We as teachers are all different, and our students are all different. Both of us tend to begin most of our classes with a game where we ask students to identify their personality. That helps them to understand themselves, and it helps us to understand them. There are some people who are just, you know, they're always talking, they're always energetic, they're always the first one to speak, the first to answer a question. They're the energizers. There are others that are the taskmaster. They're focused on the task. They tell me what to do and I will have it done before you ask.
And do it on time. Every 5 minutes, one task. Next, at 4 o'clock, finish. Go, leave.
Can you tell she's largely a taskmaster? Then there are those that are the participators. They always want to listen. They always, let's work together, collaborative, cooperative, working together with one another. And the analyzers. The analyzers like to work by themselves late at night, do nothing else, talk to nobody else. Okay, very different people. Being a biologist, I call them larks, singing on a fence post. Hawks, focused on the prey. Doves, always in a group together. Owls, by themselves at night, nobody around. And all of these have different personalities that affect teaching, whether it's the students, whether it's the teachers. The energizers, they're dreamers. They have lots of innovative ideas. They want to try something new, creative. The taskmasters, just do it now. Finish it. If it doesn't work, move on to something else. If it works, move on to something else. The participators, it's all about relationships, building trust, building cooperation, caring. The analyzers, planning ahead, getting it just right. Perfection, minimizing risk.
So you can see, if you assign a task for discussion in a group of people, who should lead the discussion? If you put all analyzers together, it will take 5 to 10 minutes for them to individually think through everything before they are willing to say anything.
In my classes, as I say, I start out with this, and I ask people to go to 4 corners of the room to talk about what their personality type is good at or has difficulty with speaking and writing. And the energizers, they'll talk for 2 minutes about the questions, and then they'll start talking about themselves and their friends and everything else. The taskmasters, they'll talk, within 2 minutes, they're done.
Yes, they finish. They say, okay, what's next?
Okay, what's next? We're ready to move on. The participators, everybody has to say something. Everybody has to have their turn.
No conclusion.
And the analyzers
Silent.
are just waiting for somebody else to start because they're still thinking about the answers to the questions. You can see in the way that the groups and the individuals in them work, you can tell a lot about the people. And then that helps me, at least, in terms of knowing my class, knowing what types of individuals I have. In engineering, what do you think? Mostly analyzers and participators. because they like to, they're not out there. They're working at their desk.
In education, there are a lot of energizers and participators. And if I ask students to sit at 4 corners, there are usually single-digit taskmasters. In my class, there are very few taskmasters, a lot of participators, and a lot of talkers too in education courses.
So again, this affects people's learning because all of these traits have a positive and a negative side. They have things that are good and things that are difficult. The energizers, they're dreamers. They have lots and lots of creative ideas. Today they're pursuing this one. Tomorrow they're pursuing that one. An hour later they're pursuing something else. It's hard for them to stay focused.
There's never a dull moment.
Living with a partial energizer. Okay, and the taskmasters, again, they do things very quickly, but sometimes don't pay attention to the details. They need someone else to help with those details. They're good leaders. They can delegate, you do this, you do this, you do this, but they don't do the detail work themselves. The participators will listen to other people. They listen, 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 but it's hard to settle on a plan. They don't take leadership. And the analyzers are planning, trying to get everything perfect before they start, and so they never finish.
So when I start my class, if I want it to be interactive, I should never call on an analyzer to answer my question because he or she will hate me forever. Because an analyzer needs time to think through everything. They don't want to respond spontaneously. That's just not responsible for them.
And so even when we were getting to know one another, I'm largely an analyzer, secondly participator. She's largely taskmaster, secondarily energizer. And so as we're talking, she would say something, and I take a second to think about it before I respond, and it's too long. She's already on to the next topic.
That's why I hated to talk over the phone, because I cannot see the other person's response. My pause time is probably 0.5 seconds. But for him, it's more than 3 seconds. So when it's da, da. See, you guys are already embarrassed and you start to laugh because it's too long. The pause time is too long for you.
Yeah. So again, all of these things are things that you need to think about when you're dealing with teaching, no matter whether it's EMI or whatever else.
Going back to calling on students to respond, it's always a good idea to call on an energizer to respond because an energizer is happy-go-lucky. Doesn't matter if I say something wrong, I'll quickly say something else. If I say charge, wrong direction, okay, this direction. Quickly turn around and go the other direction. So ask energizer to respond to your quick questions like that. And ask analyzer. Don't ask analyzer. Just don't ask analyzer until they think through.
Give the analyzer time to think. Then they come up with a very good answer.
And analyzers think they are 100% correct.
Well, we are.
Yes.
Okay, but then within academic culture, there are also personal issues.
For example, in teaching English as a second language, we always encounter so many different methods. You can see the first 4 methods are very much teacher-oriented and very much content-oriented. What is language? It's knowledge. So for the first categories. For the next 4, from 5 to 8, it's very much people-oriented, relationship-oriented. So, students matter. What do they want to learn? Can we create a very comfortable atmosphere so they can feel they are inspired when they listen to music? They can relax. There's no emotional discomfort. So that's the next 4. The very last 2, it's very current. In other words, we want it to be natural. Do not 揠苗助长. Don't work too early before they're ready. That's the natural approach. And also, communicative method. Language is no longer content, knowledge, but a tool for communication. So in the next 9 and 10 categories, teacher-student relationships is different. Especially number 10, we are all friends. We are all equal. We are on first name basis, calling each other Mary, Paul, John, Jason. Okay, so that's so you can see all these different methods. We should think about what is language. Number 2, what is the relationship between the teacher and the students? And then you will have certain preference for certain methods because of your view of what language is and who you are as an instructor. Are you the boss? Or are you a coach? Or are you service provider? Your students are customers or your employees or trainees, right? Different roles, then you treat them differently. And you will use different methods for your English classes.
So one of the methods that we use in our classes, both of us use, this is a pedagogical tool to generate discussion. Because if you ask for, does anyone have any questions? No. Nobody has questions. Maybe an energizer will raise their hand, or probably not even raise their hand. They'll just blurt out their question. But certainly the participators and analyzers will never ask a question or will never respond to a question. And particularly when you're working in a second language and people need time to process and make sure that they can say things. So we use this concept of think, pair, share. You ask a question and then you say, each one of you think about it for 30 seconds, a minute, depending on the depth of the question.
And take some notes, too.
And then share with one other person or 2 other people. Share with people at your table, in this case. And then after you've had a chance to verbalize and the other person says, yeah, that's a good idea, then you're more willing to share it with the class. This is an excellent technique.
So, in one of my undergraduate classes, I asked students to think about, to reflect on their English teachers when they were growing up. So you can also think about the same thing. Think about what they did. Okay, so these are the students' responses. You can see what makes a class delivered in English works. Students have to understand what you're talking about. That's really the key point. And a variety of teaching methods And the teacher has to be humorous too. Don't make it boring. And of course, the teacher has to be knowledgeable. So a teacher needs to have all 4 different personalities involved, right? As an energizer, so nobody can sleep. A taskmaster, what's next? Are you done? How about you? Now you tell me such and such. Assign tasks. As a participator, if somebody shows discouraged, I can quickly put on a hat, starting to say, what happened? Become a totally different person. And of course, I need to have analyzed everything clearly, systematically, so I can present the knowledge to everybody. So they say, oh, okay, yeah, she does know what she's talking about.
And so when I begin my class with these temperament types, and I act out just like I did here, and then I say, now what do you think that I am? And usually at least a third of each class thinks I'm an energizer. And I say, nope, not at all. But why am I not acting like an analyzer here? Because if I act like an analyzer and talk like this all the time, you're all going to be falling asleep before the end of the class. So I have learned that I need to adopt some of these strengths from other personality types in order to meet the needs of my students.
So on the other hand, if students cannot understand what you're talking about, that's really like hell. It's just intolerable. They cannot stand it. And of course, if we are, we couldn't, if we read the same thing again and again and not able to communicate with the students on their level or test all the time without giving examples, that's always, the no-no thing to do. Okay. Now, let's talk about our understanding of EMI. You may think, why do we need to talk about it? We are here for an EMI workshop. Let's think about what is EMI. Okay, these are 3 categories. As a linguist, we always like to talk about prototypes. What is a noun? What is a verb? We have prototypical noun, prototypical verb, and there are others, which are in between. So let's think about the content offered in different departments. Those of us who worked in English department, all the courses are taught in English. Is it EMI? We never thought about, that's EMI. But if it's delivered in engineering department, other departments, oh, that's EMI. But the English department who have done EMI for ages, they don't count. How about who speaks English? If it's a L2, L1, first language speaker, who teaches a class, is it EMI? Versus I, as a second language speaker, I teach an English medium instruction class. Who is more EMI? Yeah, I am more EMI than he is. How about the students? If we address L2 speakers, we're all lingua franca speakers, that's more EMI than if I have a group of American students, first language speakers right here. Is it EMI? Right? And how about English skill classes? I remember yesterday at the dinner, some of the professors, 林老师在不在? Some of the professors said, this is a 英文课. He talked about EMI as a 英文课, something like that. Yeah. To me, it's not. EMI is not 英文课, not English skills courses. Okay, so we all have language center, right? Language center. If we teach EAP, English for academic purposes, English for specific purposes, or simply English classes, English skills, is that EMI? Is that EMI? The focus is on English skills. That's not EMI. The focus should be on the content of the discipline. That's EMI. And again, depending on in what department, who's the teacher, who's the student, we have very prototypical, sparrow or robin, prototypical EMI. And the rest are all penguins. Penguins. Penguins are they birds? They say, yes, we are birds, but are they?
And so there are certain things that are prototypical EMI. Those are easy to identify. But then there are all these others, and, well, yes, they are, but they're not.
One example, Jerry is teaching engineering writing in engineering school. Is that EMI?
We'll talk a little later. We'll answer that a little later.
Okay, you can answer right now. I'm a taskmaster. I need the answer right away. Don't delay.
We would classify that as EAP, English for academic purposes. But my engineering school thinks it's EMI because it's taught in English, and we do deal with engineering content because they are reading and writing about their thesis topic. So as a linguist, she says it's EAP, but my engineering program says it's EMI.
In other words, when I think about EMI, this is my concept. I drew this picture. There are two extremes. The right-hand side of the picture, for me, that's really EMI. In other words, English should be treated like invisible resources, just like the sun, the air, and the water. They are invisible, but they are so crucial. If you don't have any one of them, you suffer. So English should be so invisible, so natural, so indispensable in this classroom that, you can learn the content without any obstacles. To me, that's EMI. That's very hard to achieve for second language speakers. But I think that's the goal. If you really want to play it real, this is real. This is not just trying to please the government, but you're doing something for the benefit of the students and for your own welfare. Then I think that's the goal on the right-hand side. It should be invisible resources, so people can concentrate on the content and naturally input in English and still stay there to process, not going out from the other side. But on the left-hand side, I remember some of my, some administrators asked me, how can I strengthen students' English so that they can take EMI? I said, if their English is not good enough, don't come to EMI. EMI is not the place to train them on the left-hand side. Train them for general English, specific English, academic English. No. This is for language center. This is for those who are stressing language, English language skills. So this is not EMI to me. And most of us doing EMI is very much like the middle. We're doing scaffolding trying to build something to make it friendly. However, it's very hard to do the middle ground too. How much code switching can you do? What is code switching? Right? Is it speaking one language and translate into another? No, that's not. And what is languaging? Languaging is to treat language as tools, natural resources. Whenever you feel language A is useful, use it. Language B, use it. Language C. That's very hard to communicate in a class like that. So it's easier said than done. We have another name called the CLIO, Content and Language Integrated Learning. So you have content and language put together. Again, it's easier said than done. We're trying to develop a model we can implement, using the middle ground so that both parties, all parties feel, I enjoy it because I speak all these languages. I understand what you are talking about. But the middle ground is hard to achieve. However, for those universities that are practicing EMI, I feel we are trying to do the middle ground. We're trying to build scaffolding, developing a model that's, practical in our setting.
Okay, so this is where we were going to address EMI versus EAP that we just did. That EAP, English for academic purposes, is using English as a tool, where it's not really it's a tool for learning rather than totally integrated as an invisible resource.
Mm-hmm. Remember, when a student comes to our class, for international students, English is the only channel they can understand. So our English is very important. But for local students who understand Chinese, why do we take EMI? Why can't we take it CMI? EMI, that's because we want to kill two birds with one stone. 一鱼两吃. That's our purpose. That's why I can put up with the teacher's English, because I'm trying to develop my English at the same time, learning the content. So we have to keep that in mind. They are here to learn English too. Okay, so in other words, our final goal of EMI is to make it EMI, edible, manageable, incredible. Just like a sandwich, it looks so beautiful with 3 layers. And then it's so easy to pick up, easy to chew, then easy to digest. It's good for my health too. That's my goal of EMI. In order to achieve that goal, we need to think verbal language is not the only tool. Verbal language is not. We have to use PPT. We have to use visual aid. And we have to use other resources like textbooks, online resources, videotapes, all kinds of things to make your class, multimodality, 多模态, multimodality.
Okay, so our goal for today is based on the idea of zone of proximal development. And again, this is an education term that you may be familiar with. There's a certain amount that you can learn on your own. You could do by yourself. And then there are things that are, you're not ready for it. We all have that sort of level. And in between is this area that you can learn something, you can do something with help. And so our goal as teachers is to help people move from what they can do on their own into what they can do with help. And that's our goal for you today, is to help you take one more step beyond what you could do on your own. And so we're trying to provide a scaffolding with our students. Scaffolding involves showing them how to do it, letting them do it with assistance, and then letting them do it themselves. And so we're going to today show you how we have done some things so that you can then try with the help of your school and others to take the next steps. And so again, as we're moving toward a goal, whatever that is, some things are too easy and it's boring. Some things are just out of reach and it causes worry and anxiety because I can't do it. And we want to aim for that middle ground where instead you find that just right zone where you can keep moving, keep taking another step. It's like climbing a hill. You know, you don't just take one step and stop. And you don't try to run because you'll run out of energy. You just keep taking one step after another, and you'll get there.
Or like Goldilocks, who is trying different porridge, 稀饭. This is too hot. That is too cold. This is just right.
Okay, so at this point we're going to stop. If you have any questions on this first part, again, particularly about what EMI is or any of the sort of basic theoretical concepts that we've talked about.
Or if you remember something vividly, this is your takeaway. Share with us, you know, something you learned from this first hour. We have 5 minutes for, you know, interaction. So I'm looking for my energizers. Okay, time is up. Let's come back as a group. Does anybody? Yes. Use microphone.
Let me do something. So my question is, now for sure our goal is how to help our students to understand and learn English like breath or like the air, so naturally they can learn everything in the same their head in English. But we know I find some of my students they just want the answer. Use English as a tool, and their goal is to have a high-paid job. So there's a goal for their life. So they don't want this direction. So there's any help we can do, because you know we can only choose one way in the class to help students learn everything and understanding in English. And some students just want a quick answer, just jump to and they choose, and they can use.
Can I ask which area? Because I know some medical universities, the students have this certificates, right? Well,
What's your background? What department? Math.
So I need to teach a calculus. So this is the sense that students don't want the true math. They just want the answer and the formula to use it.
And then
Exactly.
For medical students, they take national certificate exams in Chinese. They say we don't need English instruction.
Yeah, for law students too. In law school, it won't make it. You know, if we try to promote EMI, they say it's none of my business in law school. Yeah, so
the question was that the students just want a quick answer. They want you to tell them the answer. Later on in the talk, we'll talk about the differences between how you learn. Different. If you give them the answer, yeah, they have that answer. But they can't figure out the next answer because they haven't figured out how to find the answer themselves. And so, again, we're trying to teach students how to learn. We're trying to teach them how to solve their own problems. That should be the goal, not just providing the answer to this problem that helps them to do well on the test, but something that will benefit them for the rest of their lives in whatever work they're trying to do. That's our goal, at least.
but if I were to take a class from you in your EMI math class, I want to learn all those terms in English. How do you say those, formula or the words I know in Chinese, but how do you say everything in English? And how do you work through the process in English? That's what I need to learn.
Right. You can read it in terms of knowing what it means, but how do you say it? Like I find that even like going to a doctor with blood pressure. In English we just say 120/70. But how do you say that in Chinese? You don't say over. There's got to be some other way that you express that. Anything that's formula oriented, you read it differently in different languages.
So that's your expertise.
Mm-hmm. Other questions?
Yes, please.
May I ask a question about the energizer part? Because you mentioned that you yourself are more like an analyzer, and you gradually learn to become an energizer in classes. But my wondering is, I think most of the audience here today are analyzers because of what we do, and how do we kind of train ourselves to become multi?
Good question. Very good question.
Okay, marry an energizer and learn from them. If that's not an option,
Say it slowly.
I said marry an energizer.
Marry an energizer, so you learn from your partner.
If that's not practical, or if it's too late, learn from other people. Okay? Again, learn. The first time that I had to do a public speech was in 5th grade. And I literally got sick to my stomach. I wanted to go to the nurse, and the teacher said, no, you can't. Because analyzers don't do that. But now I can stand here and talk. You do it. You try it. You force yourself to go beyond. If you are truly student-centered and you see the students falling asleep, you say, that's no good. If they're falling asleep, they're not learning. I have to do something. What can I do? I can be more dramatic. I'm not going to pound on the table, but I can change the intonation of my voice. I can spend more time, instead of lecturing all the time, I can have different types of activities during class. We'll talk more about that later.
And on the other hand, as a taskmaster, I need to learn to be an analyzer. Otherwise, how can I publish, at the university so I can get promoted? I need to write research papers. So I have to treat it as a task. And also, how do I interact with my students as a warm, friendly teacher? I treat it as a task. I need to build relationship with you.
Okay, we have time maybe for one more question, if there is one. One more in the back.
About the learning paths of the students. Since the different personality of the student will affect our teaching.
Yes.
So how do you see, because the energetic student may respond quickly, so I can continue the next content of the course. But how do I kind of evaluate what time or at what circumstance I can move on? Because the students' response are different.
Okay, how do you evaluate? Because students are ready to respond or ready to move on at different times. Yeah, that's always the challenge of teaching. No matter whether you're in English or Chinese or whatever, you have a curve. And the fast students are ready to move on. Already there. And the ones at the bottom are never going to make it. no matter what you do. So you have to learn to read students. You have to learn, and again, at the beginning of every class, I tell students, you know, if you don't understand, you don't have to raise your hand, just look puzzled. And you know, if they are willing to look puzzled, then, and you learn to read that, then you can figure out, okay, we're ready to go on. The other thing is, don't depend only on lecture. Have time in your class, if you can do it, that you can talk with students individually. And while they are doing work on something. And then those that have it, they just go. Those that need a little more help, you or your TA, if you have a TA, can spend that extra time to help those that need a little more help. By using varied...
One other trick is what makes EMI successful, because students have to read the materials ahead of time. If they come cold, they will go away cold. But if you assign materials for them to prepare, they already have the schema in their mind. They know where you are leading to. That will help. So ask your students to read the textbook.
Okay, we want to give everybody a chance to take a 5-minute break so we can be refreshed, you can be refreshed, and then we'll go on to the next part. So we'll come back at 9:40.